Okay, so good morning and thank you for joining the final show and tell and wrap up of Sprint 24 of the Send Top Up tool and the beta version of the product. To recap on the vision, it's to simplify and unify the Send Top Up funding service across schools by designing and building a reusable and accessible web-based application for Send coordinators, administrators and reviewers. So phase two, what have we achieved in phase two following the wrap up of phase one in March, April time? So new features include the revision request review page. So that's the ability to review the provisions selected, select those provisions against funding needs, and then see the total amount eligible for the assessment. The ability to upload evidence documents, and then the automation of those documents being sent to SharePoint. The ability to read and accept terms and conditions and submit an application, and a confirmation email and page. Further amends to phase one features have included the removal of the need provision levels to show provisions have been activated. So that came off the back of testing and feedback, realizing that actually it was more confusing than not. So going back to simplifying it just to show users that their provisions have been activated by selecting the needs. We changed the Plan Do Review PDF to landscape, and that's making it easier to read and digest and work with the support plan that they have to do, and a sort of list of bugs and database amends as well. That's obviously high level features. There's a lot of more detailed tickets in phase two as well. Part of the provision review page obviously meant getting a database to work with that for the back end that could be reused and easily updated. So I am going to, if we can get this to work, Matt, hand over to Matt just to talk about that for a moment. Actually, you're just going to talk about it, Matt, aren't you?
Yes, actually, well, if you just show that slide, then I can just say what I was going to say anyway. Okay, well, let's. I think probably the main point about this Send project is that there was we had to present quite a lot of text data, but the structure of it is actually quite simple. So in a sense, the whole Send app is like a giant multiple choice questionnaire. There's lots of need statements. The user chooses the appropriate ones. We store their choices. And then same with the provision statements, they choose the ones that they want, we store their choices. Most web apps have a relational database behind them, which allows you to store lots of complex data, complicated relationships, and millions and billions of records. But that isn't the type of data that we were storing here. We have 764 unique need statements, but they only ever appear under a set category in a sub area in a statement group, so they don't end up appearing under somewhere else. So there's a kind of hierarchy above each statement. So that in that case, we decided to use a thing called JSON files, JSON object notation, which you can see the blue and the blue and the red stuff basically is a text file with some curly braces and commas and colons and stuff like that, and then that's how it stores the data. It's the first time we've done this, so it had a few challenges. We used Azure Cosmos DB, which is Microsoft's own product. Mainly because there are lots of nice, easy examples for us to follow. But there's similar things. There's the product called MongoDB, which is very similar and allows you to store data in the same way. But we went with Cosmos because there's plenty of examples. Plus, the pricing structure is quite clear on Cosmos, which I think is probably because it's Microsoft's own product and they want you to use it. So from a programmer's point of view, the fact that it's stored in this JSON file doesn't make much difference to us in terms of how you interact with it. You can just select the data out of it. You don't have to play around. The fact that it's stored in this odd file format doesn't really make any difference to us. So apart from the the newness of the Cosmos DB product that we were using. The probably the main challenge was turning the Excel document that we had, which is it on that screen? I can't actually see it at the moment. Yes,
You
down
can
the
see it
bottom
just
there.
at the bottom, yeah.
Yeah. So the statements are in on a specific sheet. They're in rows. They're in columns. We had to kind of extract that and turn it into the stuff that you see just above in the blue and the red, which is a bit of a challenge. So it has to be turned into this JSON format. So I found a basic Excel macro that could produce a simple JSON file from data that's in a spreadsheet, and then bit by bit I developed it. I just added elements, adding the sub area, then adding the subgroup, then adding the statement, and so on, working through that and keep working through that until I found that I could make it run without the whole thing falling over. And in order to do that, the macro code had to be kind of keep tweaking it to say, okay, this is a new entity here, stick in a curly brace, that's the end of it, close the curly brace, stick in a comma, stick in a semicolon, all this kind of stuff. So doing that, it might sound as though having to write a kind of a macro to get this data out rather than just taking it straight out of Excel might sound a bit heavyweight, but overall I think it's the right approach because it allowed us to have a source of truth document that wasn't too techy. It was still possible for Jude and Alison to alter that source of truth spreadsheet because they were the people in control of the content. But we could convert all the source of truth spreadsheets into valid data that the database could use within probably a couple of hours, which is mostly an automated process. If we tried to do it manually, it would take us a year, but it's mostly an automated process. I did have to set a couple of restrictions on Jude and Alison about what appears where in the source of truth, just so that it will convert over. But the whole process was far easier than the alternative, which might have been to build a purpose-built content editing system for the needs and the provision statements. So we didn't have to consider that. I just say, one other thing that's probably worth saying here is that all the data in these tables is now at the moment form version 1.0 because we haven't gone live yet. So the needs and the provision statements are fairly static. They're not changing every week as some data does. These are actually going to be fairly kind of read-only. But it is likely that they could change over time. So statement groups and statements could be added or moved or removed or whatever. And most of those sorts of changes don't present a problem. So typos can be fixed, statement text can be changed, even statements can be added. But certain types of changes would potentially affect our ability to reconstruct an assessment that was written in December 2022 if you get to December 2023, because the data structure may have changed a little bit in the meantime. So at some point, if we get major changes needed to the data, if there's a kind of if a subgroup has to come under a different sub area, for example, we'll have to create a new form version 1.1 or form version 2.0, and then all the assessments that are created after that point would use the new version, but we've still got a snapshot in the database of the data, the way the statements were written beforehand, so we could reconstruct somebody's assessment that was created before the data changed. So we don't lose anything from that point of view. So anyway, I think just basically to say that we chose this JSON format because it was by far the best choice. It's not necessarily for a developer's point of view, it's not necessarily the best thing since sliced bread. It doesn't mean that all web apps should be done using JSON files rather than relational databases. But in this case, it was the ideal fit for the type of data that we've got, and it enabled us to get this thing up and running fairly quickly, I think. Yeah, so I think that's about all I know you're dying to hear about the data, but
and it's
those
something
are the
we can
things.
share on GitHub as well, isn't it? So that source of
Yeah,
truth is something that as a template
yeah,
people have access to it, and we can keep the versions there as well,
yeah,
making it easily reused and updatable.
yeah. And of course the macro is inside. We're sharing the source of truth and the macro spreadsheet that's used to convert it, because actually the macro, the VBA code is not inside the source of truth. it's in a separate one. I have to copy out that, paste it into the one that's got the macro in it, and then run it. But that's all available on GitHub.
Okay, great. Shall I move on? So on that note, and to give it some context, we'll do an end-to-end demonstration from the start. Just to highlight, I'm already logged in, but I can sign out and sign back in. A reminder from phase 1 that it's linked to our Azure Active Directory, making it secure. I sign back in. You can identify that it's me logged in, and I only have access to all the assessments that I've created previously. But I'll start a new one just to show what it's like to start a new assessment. So if I go with quickly that this is obviously a made up UPN, unique pupil number. Name of school. I create a new assessment. It takes me to, so this is new for phase 2, the overview page. So this is the starting point, really. It's the, you can almost think of it as a content page. It allows Senko to start their graduated response, so their plan to review. So if I click into there, it brings me to the summary page where I can select my needs. Recapping again from phase 1, that on the left are needs that I can select. On the right are provisions that are not yet activated because I've not at the moment selected any needs. So if I click into expressive language and communication, I get a selection of subcategories that I can expand. I can read the targeted expected statement and choose the statement that's most appropriate for the assessment I'm completing on the child or young person. Obviously here I'm just choosing anything. I'm not actually basing this on an assessment. If I press save, it says you may now select provisions, so I can go back. And now the provisions for that area have been activated. So I can click into provisions, where I'm presented with breakdown of provisions, find the ones that most match the needs that I've selected. It's probably worth pausing here and saying, after some further testing and a workshop with the Senkos the other week, we've realised, and it's now in the backlog, that it would be useful for Senkos to have a view of the needs that they've selected at this point, so that they don't have to click back and remind themselves of the needs that have been selected. So that's a high level ticket that we've captured in the backlog at the moment. Once I've selected, it shows me the provisions that I've chosen, and I can go back. And now you can see the provisions against that need area. If I go into another need area, I can do the same again. We went through a bit of a journey to get to this layout for the need statement. So I think, Monica, you're going to talk a little bit about the research and the decisions to design the page like this.
Yes, can you open one of needs categories, please?
Yeah, no problem.
So as here you can see, you have need statements in the gray rectangular shape. At the beginning, when I was creating wireframes, I was quite influenced by the original needs matrix, which had labels and was color-coded. So initial version of that wireframe was full with, well, not full with colors. There were 3 colors, which each was responding to a level of need. And also there were labels above each statement. But after consultations with Senkos and advisors and developers, it occurred that actually Senkos do not need to know that, because all the identification of highest level of need is happening behind the scene. So Senkos just had to select the higher level of needs for that child, reading statements. They didn't have to worry if it was level A, B, or C. It was just the kind of technicality, which we didn't have to reveal. So first we started by dropping a label, but then we realized that actually color coding brings more confusion. So we just stripped it and ended up with clear gray background. And gray because then it's clearer when you select need statement, then you can clearly see which one out of these has been selected. And it was similar with confirmation panel. If you, Amy, can scroll to the bottom, please. Can you select 1 or 2 provisions? Yes, so at the beginning, we were telling here that which level of need has been identified, but actually it wasn't too informative for Senkos. So we decided to provide more actionable information. So we state here that they may select provisions. Thank you. And it's the same confirmation screen on the summary page, which prompts them to look at the provision link to see that it changed from, can you scroll down a bit? It changed from gray to blue. Lower down? Oh, yes. Yes, we can see that here. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So that's obviously then it is open to Senkos to choose which need areas are relevant to the assessment they're doing. Once they've selected all the needs and relevant provisions, there's the ability, and this again is recapping on phase 1. This was in production by about March, April, the ability to download the PDF and use that to, take to parents, use as part of their support plan, use however they need. So I can download that PDF, can open it. And here you see a summary of the UPN assessment date that it was edited on, name of school and Senko name, a summary, all the selected needs and the list of provisions against those needs. Again, we started off slightly different with this and we went through a bit of a journey to change it to this landscape version, and we've also got further feedback. We've got a backlog ticket to refine it yet again, but for the moment it's usable. Obviously it can just be improved. So I think, Monica, you have a few points on how again we changed from the previous PDF that people would have seen in the phase 1 demo to this landscape version.
Yes, so initially we had portrait version, which was listing selected needs, and then provision, which were selected against these needs, and it was repeated for every category. But then we got feedback that it would be actually better to have it in landscape version, but it brought a bit of complication because, as you see on the right, not always the provision will match visually will match the category of needs category on the left. So if you can, you cannot scroll more because you see there are 3 selected provisions and there are 2 categories. So actually visually it's difficult for you to tell which one has been selected for which need. So right now we are about to split it a bit. So selected needs category will have on the landscape level provisions selected for that category, and then there will be probably a gap until the next category will be visible.
Yeah. So again, at the end of phase 2, and we're in production with the beta product, so the feedback is it is usable, but it could be improved, and hopefully we can further that and improve the beta version with those changes.
And the only thing, if I can just add, for that kind of solution to have category for selected needs and plan provision, is that this way it will be more helpful for Senko to create a care plan, because then they can tell what kind of intervention they plan for certain needs. So this is just to incorporate that PDF into their workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the end of phase 1 with those updates. If I go back, we're now into what was done in phase 2, so the steps for application or funding contribution. So step 1 is the ability to check and confirm the final list of provisions. Now that the provisions have been chosen against the needs, Senko can select the provision request review link, and they come to the provision review page. Here, they do have the ability to expand and see the needs selected, so that they don't have to go back and cross-check that or have 2 tabs open. It's important, it's been highlighted that action is needed here to deduplicate any provisions and double check those selected. And then they have the ability to select the provisions that apply for a funding request. So if I select the ones that I want to request funding against, subject to review of evidence, the maximum contribution you're entitled to is, and then it provides the amount. If I don't select anything, see the cost is 0, and in some cases it will change depending on those that you've selected. I don't have it here because I haven't chosen enough provisions, but if I've chosen too many provisions and it exceeds a certain amount, there will be a message. Actually, if I go back, it's probably worth showing that. If the provisions selected exceed the hours in a week, an error message will highlight that. Hopefully I can get that to show. Select them all to be safe. Ah, no, I need to select them all. One more time. Ah, okay. Not working on this one, but I think there might be some.
It's to do with the fact that obviously there are limits, but each of the provisions will have, some of them have quite a small allocated weekly time slot.
Yeah.
So I have tested all these boundaries, and there are boundaries for individual areas of provision, which will, there's the caps are sometimes smaller than the weekly cap. But overall, the cap, depending on the size of the provision you selected, that will contribute to the overall cap, which has been tested. And there are different cut-offs. But if you were, for example, to pick this is not accurate data, but for example, one of these areas might have a cap of say 16 hours. If you some of these provisions are grouped into that area, and if you choose provisions that equate to more than 16 hours, you will hit the cap, even though the overall weekly cap is something like 35 hours. I can't remember the exact figure, but the caps are slightly, it's not all just within the weekly, there are other caps to bear in mind.
Yeah, I've just selected the wrong provisions to highlight that, but there is an error message that shows that says, you know, you've exceeded the weekly amount. Please review. Here as well, you can.
I was going to say, if you selected ones from different areas, wouldn't you? It would be more likely to trigger it off. So if you'd done another set of provisions for a different set of needs, and then you use similar options to the ones that you had in this one, you'd be more likely to hit the caps, I think, then possibly.
Yeah, I'm just doing an unrealistic because I'm just
Yeah.
picking anything rather than a realistic assessment. At the bottom here, you can see if there's any additional or different provisions. It highlights that fact and says it will go through a slightly different process, just to let you know that if you select that, it's not within the same, it won't go through the same application. It will have to kind of be triaged off to go through a different approval. Confirm what time they go. If I go back, so I've done step 1, which is the provision request review. Again, this is phase 2 beta. We've got the steps, the ability to just go through each step. However, we do have in the backlog a way to sort of put some logic behind it to not activate the next step until you've completed the step before. But at the moment, you go through each step one at a time. So step 2 is providing the additional information. So the ability to upload support documents. Gives you a list of examples and allows you to then upload those. So you've got 3 that are mandatory, which is the support plan, the whole school provision map, and the funding application request. Underneath that, some other examples of most likely documents that could be uploaded and the ability for any other that may have been missed. So if I just choose a file for now, just choose anything. As you can see, it's loading. Again, in the backlog, we've identified it could take a moment or so, and we've got a loading pattern that can be applied just to allow users to realize it is loading and it's not broken. Obviously, I will upload all the 3 mandatory. For now, again, we don't have any logic applied, so someone can just upload 1 mandatory and submit. However, we do have as a backlog ticket, again, user must have uploaded the 3 mandatory documents to continue. I go back. Step 3 is the ability to submit the application. So if I've been through steps 1 and 2, I can read the terms and conditions, agree to those terms and conditions, and submit. But I'll just going back a minute, going back to the upload support documents. The funding application request, again, has been something that's been improved, which Alison and Jude have worked on to make sure that actually there's only one sheet that SENCOs can complete and then the panel can use. This is simplifying what was previously a document that the SENCOs would complete. It would go to the panel and the data would be manually moved into another sheet that was just for the panel. So this is, again, something that's been simplified in that process. I select submit, confirmation page that the application has been received. information and a link back to the local offer website for more information about the top-up panel dates. I will have also received an email, which I can open and show in a minute, or return back to assessments. Matt, I'm not sure if you can share your screen. So what's happened there when it's been submitted is the documents and the PDF with the provision review list of provisions that you've selected against funding, the documents of evidence, including the top sheets, have all, thank you, Matt, have been transferred automatically to a SharePoint folder that the panel can access to start the application assessment process.
Obviously, this is our development one. Is it worth just mentioning that there's the GDPR point that we've, whatever the name of the document was that you were uploading, it gets renamed, so we avoid having potential information like a child's name or something in our process. These are all kind of generic names. So if you upload something as a type support plan, it becomes support plan mandatory.pdf, and it doesn't save the name that it might have originally, which might have the child's name in it. So in that case, we managed to avoid the whole issue of confidential information because our app doesn't actually hang on to any of that sort of stuff. It just passes it on to SharePoint.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I've got the email here, so I'll just show that as well. So email mirrors the confirmation page. It will eventually go to the top-up panels inbox. So obviously that can be configured to go wherever it needs to go for the application panel. So that was the that is the beta product. It's obviously on a production URL now. It's totally usable, minimal lovable product, as we like to call it. But obviously we know there's a lot more that can be done, and we can already see the potential of where it can go. So what's next? The future roadmap looks something like, but obviously with further validation needed. Our hope is that it can be used in some real life scenarios, so we can continue to get that real life feedback from users going through the application process and using the plan do review assessment part of it. But high level is the ability to add last submitted on to the summary page. Again, this is an assumption at the moment. We need to understand if that's helpful or not, to let Senkos understand which assessments have been submitted as an application, which are in a continual cycle of plan do review. The ability for users to search for a specific assessment. Again, this is an assumption at the moment. We need to understand how many assessments end up being created. Obviously, if that list gets quite long, it will be hard to use. So we assume we'll probably need some way for them to search for a specific assessment without scrolling. An extra level of virus check on the submitted documents, just to give that extra level of security. This is a known ticket that we need to do. Improve the plan do review PDF to match the support plans. Again, a known feedback from a demo day and understanding that it can be much more helpful. Build an SQL query to find and fix duplicate IDs. Known, again, something that has come up as a previous bug, but we know that with that query, it will help run a check on any duplicate IDs, which causes bugs and the assessment ability to choose needs not to work. Add logic to the application steps, as mentioned during the demo, so ensure no submissions are sent without mandatory documents uploaded and other checks. The adding of the overlay, again, the loading, another known. We just realised that it can look broken if there isn't something there visually to show that it's just currently uploading in the background. On an epic level, so it needs a lot more discovery and understanding. We need to update and tidy up the GitHub page. The design styling, so at the moment we want to, it's not quite matched to our design system, central design system. We want to make sure that it is using our central design system and also can be easily changed to use a design system for whoever is building the tool in other local authorities. We need to update and automate the test suite. So in phase 1, we had in an automated test person to come in, and David Wesson, who wrote a load of test cases, and those need updating to cover phase 2, and we need a plan and a strategy of how we keep those updated. We need to connect the well, we believe that it's going to be important to surface the data, possibly using Power BI, to gather insights from the needs and provisions and costs, and allow people to see high level where funding's going, where the highest needs are, where the highest provisions are, and so forth. So it becomes, a really rich source of data at a higher level. We need to do a bit of discovery or some spikes into how that could possibly connect to Power BI, and possibly understand how the application can work for EHCP and early years funding, which, Alison, I'm not sure if you want to maybe say a few words on.
Well, I think from the case studies that we did at the workshop, although I'd asked them not to bring children with an EHCP, most of them did. But that's quite useful because we know that at least the statements and the provision that we've got will cater for children with an EHCP, which is at a higher level, which Jude and I thought that it probably would, but that wasn't the main intention. With regards to early years, Jude's already been working on collecting writing the needs statements for the early years provision, which would be 0 to 5-year-olds. And last week I presented this to Richard Hanks, the Director of Education, and the senior leaders from the Education and Skills team, and they were very excited about it and want to look at expanding it to cater for the 0 to 5s and for the post-16s. We have got some post-16 statements which have been included, but it would be more looking at how to adapt the funding for the provision for those two groups, because the 0 to 5s and the post-16s are both funded from separate funding streams and at different levels to the 5 to 16-year-old provision, which has been costed here. So it would be spending some time to think about how that would work. But I think in the first instance, it's just trying to roll this out a bit more, get a more substantial set of case studies to evidence that the accuracy of the funding for what we've got already in place, and then just get people using it so they can feed back on the functionality. But I think after the workshop we had a couple of weeks ago, that's all gone really well, so that's good.
Yeah, great. And I think it's important to say that, yeah, we want local authorities to reach out to us now and start asking for for one-to-one demos or access to the GitHub page, and to allow us to get an understanding for how we can build a phase 3 to sort of meet a wider need across local authorities as well. So that's, we're hoping to take a bit of breathing space to do that and start talking to different local authorities as well. So just finally, a note on tracking the metrics. We've benchmarked some high-level metrics prior to launch, such as the number of assessments rejected previously before this has been built, the number of hours it takes SENCOs to apply for funding, which, quite surprisingly, up to 40% of SENCOs were saying it was taking them more than 8 hours, 43% between 3 and 4. Already we can see, this metric is going to be massively reduced. So we will just spend some time and, again, breathing space to capture the impact that this is going to have on some high level targets that we've set out. It's really important that we do monitor that and check its success, make decisions based on those. So that's the end of phase 2 demo and having the beta product in production. Obviously, it's a shame Vasanth can't be with us today. He's one of the contractors that came on for the project. The funding is at an end, so he's left us. But really, it's been a joy to work with him, and he's been excellent, and he's really enjoyed working on this product as well. Excited and wants to be invited back if we do get to a phase 3.
We wouldn't have got there without him, I think. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's been key, and yeah, just the rest of the team. So Monica, Matt, and Christian as well. So big thank you, and Alison. You and Jude obviously driving the product. But it's been a joy, and I think we really hope that again this can be helpful not only for Bristol City Council schools but also other local authorities too.